Our journey starts in Iraq, right between two rivers, where the very first civilizations decided to build massive pyramid-shaped towers so their priests could climb up and do strange things, like stare at stars and imagine they were bears. The ancient Sumerians living there actually mapped out days into hours, minutes, and seconds, and they invented writing. Politically, though, it was a mess. Every city had its own king, and they all acted completely independent from the rest. Then a ruler named Sargon looked at that inefficiency and had an idea. He united the cities, but not to help the people. He did it to increase his own pride, power, and possessions, conquering his neighbors to build the very first empire. Right around the same time, the Egyptians were in the desert piling stones into giant pyramids. The Minoans were painting frescoes, and people in the Indus River Valley were organizing cities with perfectly straight roads. Meanwhile, the Canaanites came up with a brilliant idea. Instead of drawing pictures, they assigned sounds to symbols. They scratched this early alphabet onto everyday objects, like a wooden lice comb, and it was so useful that everyone copied it. Sargon's use of force to unite these cities established a blueprint for authority. As tools like the alphabet and centralized record-keeping spread, expansion through conquest became the standard way for these early civilizations to grow and eventually fall. That behavior picked right back up with the Persians. They built a massive empire, but made the mistake of annoying the Athenians, a group of Greeks who had recently come up with the idea of democracy. A student of Greek philosophy named Alexander took revenge on those Persians. He swept across the map, conquered the known world in record time, decided he was a god, and then promptly died. Since he wasn't immortal after all, his generals looked at each other, declared themselves the new rulers, and immediately fought until they split his empire into pieces. Over in the West, a new group took advantage of the chaos. The Romans crushed their rivals from Carthage, expanded relentlessly, and after a messy civil war, Augustus took total control as the first official emperor. During their rule, the Romans crucified a man named Jesus. When his followers claimed he came back to life, the empire tried to stomp the movement out by feeding Christians to lions. The persecution backfired spectacularly, making the religion wildly popular. The men who carved their faces into marble and demanded to be worshipped are dead. The philosophies they debated and the religions they tried to erase ended up outliving their borders by thousands of years. Eventually, Germanic tribes pushed into the Western Roman Empire. They vandalized the capital, set up their own kingdoms, and completely shattered Europe's political structure into a loose collection of fragmented states. While Europe was falling apart, Asia was actively consolidating. In China, huge dynasties would rise and fall, and they poured immense labor into building massive stone walls, specifically to keep outsiders from interfering. Centuries of infighting among Arab clans vanished when they united under Islam. With internal conflicts forbidden, they directed their energy outward and quickly conquered a territory larger than anything the world had ever seen. Up north, the lack of strong borders in Europe allowed the Vikings to go wild. Sailing these wooden longships, they pillaged coastlines and set up settlements everywhere from Russia to Iceland and even North America. Over in Asia, Genghis Khan burst out of Mongolia to conquer twice as much land as Alexander. The Mongols connected the east and west so effectively that they accidentally opened a fast lane for the Black Death, which wiped out a third of Europe. These highly mobile conquerors ripped down the old boundaries. By forcing isolated corners of the map into contact, they established vast, lucrative trade routes and ensured that diseases could travel just as quickly as silk or spices. Europe eventually recovered from the plague and started using a movable type printing press. Suddenly, anyone could mass-produce ideas cheaply. A German priest used it to protest the Catholic Church, triggering decades of conflict and religious reformations. Looking for an end, European powers took to the oceans. While the Portuguese sailed around Africa to bypass overland trade routes, Columbus tried a shortcut west and accidentally ran into the Americas. The results were catastrophic for the people already living there. The Spanish arrived and quickly dismantled the Aztec and Inca empires for their gold, while the Portuguese initiated a massive, brutal network of trading human beings as slaves. Back in Britain, they decided to automate. They harnessed steam power to manufacture goods faster and cheaper than anyone else. To feed those machines, they needed raw materials, and they needed markets to sell the finished products. To get those resources, the British deployed their unmatched navy. They took over India, and when China told them to stop smuggling opium, the British sent warships to seize Hong Kong and force entire nations to comply. These industrial empires functioned as systematic extraction machines. They used global networks to pull wealth and raw materials from every continent back to the factories of Europe. By the late 19th century, newly unified nations like Germany and Italy wanted their own overseas empires. There was just one massive problem. Almost every profitable piece of real estate on the planet was already claimed. European leaders sat down, looked at a map of Africa, and drew arbitrary lines to divide it, justifying the grab with bogus evolutionary theories. They mapped the continent without a single African representative, ignoring the wealthy empires that had governed Mali and Zimbabwe for centuries. After the rush for Africa, the map was packed. The only major territory left that wasn't locked down by a European superpower was the rapidly crumbling Ottoman Empire in the Middle East. At the exact same time, factories were pumping out terrifying new technologies. Inventors were rolling out telephones and airplanes, but they were also building massive steel battleships and underwater submarines. The human race spent thousands of years conquering neighbors and expanding borders, but with industrial weapons, massive national egos, and zero space to claim, the globe was a pressure cooker about to explode.